For 2 days, a red Renault Duster sat parked on a dead-end street in the Itaquera neighborhood of São Paulo. To people living on Rua Tobias Leo, it was just an unfamiliar car, left in a strange spot. But inside that vehicle, a dark and tragic secret was hidden. A beloved teacher's life had been cut short, not in a crime of passion or some random accident, but through a cold, calculated act of betrayal. The woman he spent his final hours with would claim his death was just a horrible misfortune. But the poison that was flowing through his veins, discovered days later, would tell a completely different story. A story of obsession, control, and meticulously planned revenge. This is how a passionate reunion became a fatal trap, and how a woman sworn to care for others used her knowledge to kill. Before we unravel this chilling case, if you find these deep dives into the psychology of crime compelling, make sure to like this video and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Now, let's get into the heart of this tragedy. To really understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to get to know the man whose life was stolen. He wasn't just a name in a case file. He was Vinícius Moutinho de Paula, and at 32 years old, he was defined by his kindness and his sense of purpose. His life was a picture of ambition, not for fame or fortune, but for the simple goal of helping people. By day, Vinícius was a physical education teacher at a public school on the east side of São Paulo. For him, this wasn't just a job, it was a calling. He worked with kids between 9 and 12, that impressionable age where a good mentor can change a young person's life. And Vinícius took that responsibility seriously. His colleagues and students' parents remembered him as more than just a PE teacher. He was a role model who saw potential in every child, especially the ones who were struggling. He just had a natural way of connecting with them, building their confidence, and teaching them lessons that went way beyond sports lessons about teamwork, discipline, and self-worth. He was the kind of teacher kids remember forever. But his drive didn't stop when the school bell rang. Vinícius was also an entrepreneur, a testament to his incredible work ethic. He had built an online fitness and nutrition store from the ground up. And this was no side hustle. He was the CEO, the marketer, and the delivery driver, all in one. Friends remember seeing him crisscrossing the city in his red Renault Duster, the very same car that would become his tomb, personally delivering supplements to gyms and customers. There was a real humility to his ambition. He wasn't above doing the hard work. In fact, he seemed to thrive on it, and he was building toward a concrete dream. By the spring of 2023, his life was on a clear upward path. He was saving every penny he could from his 2 jobs for one single goal: opening his own health school. He was already scouting locations, picturing a place where he could build a community dedicated to fitness and well-being. His character was the foundation for all of it, described by everyone who knew him as responsible, loving, and strong. Vinícius lived the values he wanted to teach. He was the rock of his family, helping his younger brothers with everything from chores to their fitness training. He was a man of discipline who didn't drink or use drugs. His strength wasn't just physical, though he was certainly powerful. It was an emotional and moral strength. He was the person you called when you were in trouble, the friend who would show up without question. His life was a picture of positive momentum, filled with goals, deep connections, and hope. He was building a legacy, one student and one customer at a time. And that's what makes the sudden, dark end to his story all the more devastating. So you have to wonder, who would want to harm a man who spent his life building others up? The answer, as investigators would soon discover, was hiding in plain sight. Every story like this has a beginning, a point where 2 paths cross and set off a chain of events that leads to ruin. For Vinícius, that moment came in 2022, when he started dating Larissa Gonçalves da Mota. On the surface, it might have seemed like a normal match. Larissa was a nursing technician, also from the east side of São Paulo. Like Vinícius, she worked in a field dedicated to helping people. But under that surface, a storm was brewing. The early days of their relationship were likely normal, but it didn't take long for things to turn toxic. Friends and family started to notice a disturbing pattern. The relationship wasn't a source of peace for Vinícius. It was a source of constant chaos. all fueled by a suffocating jealousy that seemed to radiate from Larissa. This wasn't a quiet struggle, either. Their fights often happened in public, leaving friends and onlookers uncomfortable. The arguments were frequent and intense, marked by an alarming level of anger. This was more than just a couple fighting. There was a possessive and controlling undercurrent to the dynamic. It seemed Larissa's affection was tangled up with a desperate need to manage Vinicius's life, and any threat to that control was met with an explosion. The emotional turmoil eventually became physical. In one disturbing incident, Larissa harmed Vinicius during a fight. The injuries were serious enough that he felt he needed to document them by taking photos. That's a major red flag. A man as physically strong as Vinicius feeling the need to create evidence against his own partner says everything about how bad things had gotten. It was a silent recognition that the person who was supposed to be his partner had become a physical danger. Realizing the relationship was not just unhealthy, but destructive, Vinicius ended it in late 2022. He broke up with Larissa, hoping to finally escape the cycle of jealousy and conflict. But for Larissa, the breakup wasn't the end. It was a rejection she simply would not accept. What came next was a campaign of obsessive pursuit. She bombarded Vinicius with calls and texts, ignoring his pleas for space. She refused to let go, her behavior painting the picture of someone who didn't see Vinicius as a person who had made a choice, but as a possession that had been stolen from her. The story takes an even more sinister turn in early 2023. At one point, Vinicius made a chilling discovery among her things. Powerful, hospital-grade sedatives. These weren't just sleeping pills. They were controlled substances that Larissa, as a nursing technician, had access to. This must have set off alarm bells. Suddenly, her erratic behavior and obsessive jealousy were cast in a much more dangerous light. The woman who refused to accept their breakup had access to potent drugs capable of incapacitating someone. There was even a time he told his new girlfriend that he believed Larissa had drugged him once before, causing him to sleep for 2 days straight. The fatal reunion hadn't happened yet, but all the pieces were already on the board. The evidence was starting to paint a terrifying picture of jealousy and obsession. If you want to see how investigators piece together a case like this, consider subscribing to our channel. We look into the fine details that bring a killer to justice. Now, let's return to the night that everything fell apart. Friday, August 4th, 2023. Started out like any other day for Vinícius Moutinho. He went to his job at the school, ran his gym classes, and did his duties as a dedicated teacher. After school, he put on his entrepreneur hat and made a delivery for his online store in the Itacura neighborhood. Around PM it was a normal day, filled with his two passions. But then, his phone rang. It was Larissa Gonalves da Mota. After months of her obsessive calls, he probably wasn't happy to hear from her. But this time, she wasn't just calling to argue. She wanted to meet. Her reason seemed innocent. She'd recently had a birthday and wanted to celebrate with him. It was a classic manipulation tactic. Maybe Vinicius, being a kind person, felt it was easier to agree to a short, public meeting than to deal with another fight. He might have thought he could handle it, that a quick chat would finally bring the closure they needed. He agreed to meet. That decision would be his last. Around PM that evening, surveillance cameras captured the next part of the story. Footage showed Vinicius's red Renault Duster pulling into a local motel with Larissa. They checked in and disappeared behind a closed door. What happened over the next few hours would become the central mystery of the case. A timeline pieced together later through her conflicting stories and cold, hard science. According to Larissa's initial statements, the night was calm. She would later tell police that they talked and were intimate, but forensic evidence would eventually scream otherwise. After Vinicius checked into that motel with Larissa, he was never seen alive again. 3 days later, on Monday, August 7, 2023, residents on Rua Tobias Leo, that quiet street in Itacura, had noticed the red Duster parked for a couple of days. It was awkwardly positioned, almost like someone tried to hide it. As time passed, a foul odor started coming from the car, and someone finally called the police. When officers arrived, they found the body of Vinícius Moutinho inside. His keys and phone were missing. There were empty bottles scattered around the car, perhaps an attempt to make it look like he had drunk himself to death. The police started reaching out to family and friends. When investigators first talked to her, Larissa played the part of a concerned, grieving ex-girlfriend, but her story was full of holes. At first, she said she left the motel around midnight. Then, she changed her story, saying it was closer to 3 a.m. She couldn't remember the names of the streets she took or any details about the Uber she claimed she ordered. Her story kept shifting, which is a classic sign of deception. While she was publicly playing the distraught ex, detectives were growing suspicious. The woman, claiming to be a victim of circumstance, was quickly becoming their primary suspect. As police dug deeper, Larissa's story started looking less like a flawed memory and more like a complete fabrication. Every piece of evidence they found pointed in one direction, straight at her. The first major blow to her story came from Vinícius's own family. They never trusted Larissa. They knew how toxic their relationship had been and how she refused to let him go. They gave the police a mountain of evidence, including recordings and text messages that proved her statements were contradictory. While police conducted their official investigation, Vinícius's mother, Selena, and his father, Hugo, were doing their own detective work. They searched the city and checked hospitals, fighting to protect the truth of their son's final days. His father was the one who, looking at security footage with police, identified Larissa getting out of Vinícius's car. The most damning digital evidence came from Juliana, the woman Vinícius was dating after Larissa. She had received a series of bizarre and disturbing messages from Vinícius's phone on the night he disappeared. The texts were cold, dismissive, and written in a style Juliana knew wasn't his. It's believed that while Vinícius was likely unconscious or dead, Larissa used his phone to impersonate him, trying to sabotage his new relationship as she was ending his life. The fact that his phone was then missing only solidified the theory. She used it, and then she got rid of it. But the most undeniable evidence came from the medical examiner's toxicology report. It completely destroyed Larissa's claim that Vinícius had simply fallen ill. The tests found a lethal cocktail of substances in his system, alcohol mixed with a massive dose of strong sedatives, the exact same type of hospital-grade drugs that Larissa, the nursing technician, had access to. The drug levels were far beyond any safe limit. They were high enough to kill. The report explained that the drugs caused severe respiratory depression, slowing his breathing until it stopped. It wasn't a quick or peaceful death. It was a slow, chemical suffocation. Critically, the forensics team found no signs of major head trauma, contradicting any story Larissa might invent about a fatal fall in the motel. With this report, all the pieces clicked into place. The toxic relationship, the obsessive behavior, the discovery of sedatives months earlier, the changing alibis, and now, the scientific proof of death by overdose. Larissa's medical knowledge wasn't just a detail, it was the murder weapon. On August 10, 2023, armed with the toxicology report and all the other evidence, São Paulo's homicide division arrested Larissa Gonçalves da Mota. The time for lies was over. When police arrived to arrest Larissa Gonçalves da Mota, the performance was over. The facade of the grieving ex-girlfriend had crumbled, leaving only a murder suspect. A search of her home turned up expired syringes, packs of medication, and a new phone that had been wiped clean, suggesting she'd gotten rid of the one she used that night. For the family of Vinícius, the arrest wasn't a celebration, but a painful step on the long road to justice. His mother, Selena, who had been a rock during the search, was a picture of pure grief at his funeral, staying by his coffin for a final, heartbreaking vigil. His father, Hugo, managed the legal nightmare that follows a sudden death, putting his own grief aside to be the strength his family needed. The psychological analysis of Larissa reveals a deeply disturbing pattern, one common in cases of intimate partner homicide. Her refusal to accept the breakup wasn't about love, but about an inability to handle rejection and a loss of control. In her mind, Vinícius wasn't a partner but a possession, and his decision to leave was a threat she had to eliminate. Using her medical knowledge was the ultimate perversion of her skills. She weaponized her access to powerful drugs, turning a tool of healing into an instrument of death. This wasn't a spontaneous crime of passion. The evidence points to a premeditated, calculated act. The story of Vinícius Moutinho de Paula is a heartbreaking reminder of the darkness that can hide just beneath the surface of a normal life. He was a man who embodied light and ambition, dedicating his life to building a better future for himself and the kids he taught. But he crossed paths with an obsession disguised as love, and it ultimately consumed him. This case is a stark illustration of how the trust we place in others can be twisted into a weapon. The betrayal here is twofold: a betrayal of Vinícius's trust, and a betrayal of the very principles of her profession as a caregiver. As this case moves through the legal system, a family and a community wait for justice. But no verdict can bring Vinícius back or fill the void he left behind. All that remains is his memory, the memory of a good man who deserved a long and beautiful life. It's a terrifying warning about the red flags of obsessive love and controlling behavior. Because sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't strangers in the shadows, but the ones who once claimed to love us the most. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories like this.